The man had never been to Egypt, but he could draw the interior of a temple that hadn't been excavated yet, room by room, pillar by pillar, down to the hieroglyphs on walls buried under sand for 3,000 years. And when archaeologists finally uncovered it 6 months later, every single detail matched. But that wasn't even the strangest part. James came to Dr. Morrison because of the headaches, migraines that started when he was 30 and never stopped. Doctors found nothing. Mr. I showed a normal brain. Medications didn't help, but the pain always came with the same vision. Stone walls, torches, the smell of incense, and a feeling like he was supposed to be somewhere, doing something he'd forgotten. Dr. Morrison specialized in past life regression. He didn't advertise it, didn't make grand claims. He just quietly helped people access memories that seemed to come from other lifetimes. And he'd seen some strange cases, but James would become the strangest. The first session was standard. James sat in the reclining chair, closed his eyes, followed the breathing pattern Dr. Morrison guided him through, went down the mental staircase, 10, 9, 8, deeper with each count. And when he reached the bottom, Dr. Morrison asked him to go back to the source of the headaches, back to where this pain began. James went quiet. His breathing changed, slowed, steadied, and then his hands moved. Not random twitches, deliberate motions, like he was holding something, writing something. Dr. Morrison watched but didn't interrupt. "Where are you?" Dr. Morrison asked. "Egypt." The word came out certain, absolute. "I'm in Egypt." "What year?" James paused. Numbers didn't matter there. Time was measured differently, but he tried to translate. "Around 1200 BC, maybe earlier. I'm not sure. The dynasties blurred together." "Who are you?" "A scribe. My name is Amenhotep. I work in the temple. I record things. Important things. Things that must be remembered." "What temple?" James described it. The size, the layout, the massive columns carved with images of gods and pharaohs, the inner sanctum where only priests could go, the library where scrolls were kept, the courtyard where ceremonies happened. He described it with the detail of someone who spent every day there, who knew every corner, every shadow, every place where light fell at different times of day. Dr. Morrison asked him to describe what he looked like. James said he was tall for that time, thin, his head was shaved, he wore white linen robes and sandals made of woven reeds. His hands had calluses from holding the reed pen hour after hour. His eyes hurt from reading in dim light. He was young, maybe 25, but he felt older. "The work aged you. What are you recording?" "Everything. The rituals, the teachings, the secrets. We're the keepers of knowledge. When pharaohs die, their wisdom dies with them, unless we write it down. When priests discover something new about the gods, about the stars, about healing, we record it. I'm a bridge between now and forever." "Do you like this work?" James hesitated. "It's not about liking. It's about duty. I was chosen for this, trained since I was a child. My father was a scribe. His father was a scribe. This is what we do. This is what we are." Dr. Morrison asked him to move forward, to a significant day, a day that mattered. The scene shifted. James was no longer in the quiet library. He was in a different part of the temple, darker, hidden. He was with other scribes, 5 of them, all young, all serious. They were being shown something that would change everything. "We're in the chamber beneath the main temple, the secret chamber. Only the highest priests know about this place. And now we're being brought here because we've been chosen." "Chosen for what?" "To learn the real knowledge. Not the stories we tell the people. Not the simplified version. The truth." "What truth?" "That the gods aren't what people think. That the temples aren't just places of worship. That we're recording something older than Egypt. Something that was here before the pyramids, before the first dynasty, before humans even understood what they were seeing." James described what they showed him. Texts that weren't in any language he recognized, symbols that hurt to look at, images of beings that weren't human, weren't animal, something else. The priests told them this knowledge came from the sky, from visitors who taught the first people everything: agriculture, architecture, mathematics, astronomy, writing itself. The scribe's job wasn't just to record current events. It was to preserve this ancient knowledge, to copy it, to keep it safe, to pass it down, because someday, they were told, humanity would forget, would lose connection to where they came from. And these records would be needed to help them remember. Did you believe them? I had to, because they showed us proof. They took us deeper, into chambers beneath the chamber, into places carved from living rock. And there, we saw it. the evidence. Technologies we couldn't explain, objects that didn't match anything we knew, and we understood that our role was bigger than we'd ever imagined. Dr. Morrison asked, "What kind of objects? What did you see?" "Things that created light without fire. Stones that hummed with energy. Texts that seemed to shift and change when you looked at them. And most strange of all, the room of records, a circular chamber where the walls were covered in symbols that glowed. The priests said this room contained the entire history of the world, past and future. Everything that had happened and everything that would happen, but only those who were prepared could read it." "Could you read it?" "No, not then. I was too young, too untrained, but they said I would learn, that over years of study I would develop the ability, that the symbols would start to make sense. And they did, slowly. As I spent more time in that chamber, copying what I saw, something in my mind opened, and I started to understand." "What did you understand?" "That time isn't linear. That past and future exist simultaneously. That the universe is far bigger and stranger than anything we teach in the public temples. That consciousness doesn't die. That we've all lived before and will live again. That Egypt wasn't the first civilization. That there were others before us, advanced beyond what we could imagine. And they left these records so we would know, so we wouldn't think we were the beginning." The session went on for 2 hours. James described his life as Amenhotep in detail. The work, the relationships, the secret teachings, the growing understanding that he was part of something vast and important. And then Dr. Morrison asked him to move forward to the end, to how that life ended. James went quiet. His breathing became labored. "Difficult. I'm old, much older than I expected to live. Most scribes don't make it past 40. The work destroys your eyes, your back, your hands. But I'm still here, still working, still recording, because the task isn't finished. It will never be finished." "What happens next?" "The temple is under threat. There's political upheaval. A new pharaoh who doesn't value the old ways, who wants to change things, to close certain temples, to suppress certain knowledge. We've been warned. Some of the priests have already fled, taken copies of the most important texts and scattered them to other temples, other countries. So the knowledge won't be lost. And I stay. Someone has to protect the chamber, the secret library, the room of records. I'm too old to run, too committed to abandon my post. So I stay. Even though I know what's coming. What's coming? Soldiers. They come at night, torch the temple, destroy what they can find, kill the priests who resist. I'm in the underground chamber when they arrive. I hear the screaming above, the sound of stone breaking, fire crackling, and I know I'm trapped. The entrance will be sealed, either by them or by the collapse. Either way, I won't get out. Are you afraid?" "No. I've lived a long life, learned what I was meant to learn, recorded what I was meant to record, and I know this isn't the end. The texts taught me that death is a doorway. I'll return, maybe not to Egypt, maybe not as a scribe, but I'll return, and maybe in that life I'll remember this one. Maybe I'll find what we hid. Maybe I'll help complete the work." "How do you die?" "The air runs out. The chamber is sealed. I sit in the darkness surrounded by scrolls and tablets and the glowing symbols on the walls, and I copy. Even though no one will see it, even though the air is getting thin and my chest is tight and I know I'm dying, I copy, because that's what scribes do. We record, until the very end, and then I put down my pen, and I close my eyes, and I stop breathing." The room was silent. Dr. Morrison waited, and then James opened his eyes, gasped, looked around, confused, disoriented. He was shaking. "What did you remember?" Dr. Morrison asked. "Everything. I was there. I lived that whole life. It wasn't a story. It wasn't imagination. I was him. I was Amenhotep." Over the next few weeks, James couldn't stop thinking about the regression. The memories felt more real than his current life. He started researching Egyptian history, reading everything he could find about scribes and temples and ancient knowledge, and he kept having the same thought. What if the chamber still exists? What if it was never found? He went back to Dr. Morrison for another session. This time, he asked specific questions. Where was the temple? What region? What landmarks were nearby? And in trance, Amenhotep answered, described the location, the bend in the river, the cliffs to the west, the distance from other known temples. James wrote it all down, and then he did something crazy. He contacted archaeologists, sent them his notes. his descriptions, his drawings of the temple layout. Most ignored him, dismissed him as another amateur with theories. But one didn't. Dr. Sarah Williams was an Egyptologist who had spent 20 years excavating sites along the Nile. She'd seen enough strange coincidences in her work to keep an open mind, and when she read James's description, something caught her attention. The location he described matched an area she'd been surveying, an area where ground-penetrating radar suggested something was buried, something large, something that looked like structures. She agreed to meet with James, skeptical but curious, and when he showed her his drawings, her skepticism cracked, because the layout he described matched patterns she'd seen in other temple complexes. The proportions were right. The architectural details were accurate. This wasn't someone making things up. This was someone who either knew Egyptian architecture deeply or had actually seen this place. "You've studied Egyptian temples?" she asked. "Never. I'm an accountant. I've never even been interested in history until the headaches started." Dr. Williams decided to excavate, not because she believed in past lives, but because the radar data suggested something was there anyway. And if James's information helped locate it, she didn't care where it came from. The dig took 6 months, and what they found matched James's drawings. Room for room, the main hall, the library, the courtyard, even the positions of the columns. But the real discovery was what James said would be there: the entrance to the lower chambers, hidden, sealed, untouched for over 3,000 years. Dr. Williams called James, told him they'd found it, asked if he wanted to be there when they opened it. James said yes, even though part of him was terrified, even though the headaches had gotten worse since the regression, like his body knew he was getting close to something he'd died protecting. He flew to Egypt, stood at the excavation site, looked at the temple emerging from the sand, and felt it. The recognition, the memory. He'd been here, he'd died here, and now he was back. They opened the lower chamber at dawn. James insisted on being one of the first to enter. Dr. Williams tried to stop him, told him it wasn't safe, told him they needed to test the air first, make sure the structure was stable. But James wouldn't wait, couldn't wait. He'd waited 3,000 years already. He descended, followed the passage down, deeper into the earth, and then he saw it. The chamber, exactly as he'd described, the walls covered in hieroglyphs, the alcoves where scrolls had been kept, most of them deteriorated beyond recognition, turned to dust by time, but some remained, sealed in clay jars, protected, waiting. And in the center of the room, slumped against the wall, bones, a skeleton, a reed pen still clutched in its bony hand, surrounded by tablets covered in text, the last writings of a scribe who chose to die recording rather than flee. James fell to his knees. He was shaking, crying. Dr. Williams came down after him, saw him staring at the skeleton, thought he was having a breakdown. But James looked at her and said 3 words that made her blood run cold. "That was me." They spent 3 days documenting the chamber before removing anything. James helped, pointed out details they would have missed, showed them where the hidden alcoves were, where the most important texts would be stored. And he was right. Every time Dr. Williams stopped trying to explain it, stopped trying to rationalize, she just accepted that somehow this man knew this place, knew it like you know your own home. They found the deeper chamber, the one Amenhotep had described, the room of records. It was collapsed, partially flooded, most of the contents destroyed, but what remained took their breath away. Texts in languages that predated Egyptian, images that didn't match any known culture. And in the center, a stone, about 3 feet tall, covered in symbols that seemed to shift when you looked at them directly, seemed to glow even though there was no power source. The academic world went crazy. The discovery made international news. Debates erupted about what they'd found, what it meant, where these texts came from. Some claimed it proved ancient astronaut theories, others insisted it was just an unknown early civilization. Nobody could agree. But James didn't care about the debates, because when he stood in that chamber, when he looked at those symbols, something happened, the same thing that happened to Amenhotep. His mind opened, and he could read them, not all of them, not perfectly, but enough to understand what they said. They were warnings, instructions, messages for the future, for a time when humanity would have the technology to understand. The texts described cycles, how civilizations rise and fall, how knowledge is lost and rediscovered, how consciousness evolves through repeated experience, through death and rebirth, through forgetting and remembering. And they described the purpose, why these records were created, why they were hidden. Because there would come a time, the texts said, when humanity would forget its connection to the cosmos, would forget it was part of something bigger, would believe it was alone, separate, limited. And in that time of forgetting, these records would resurface, would be found by those who were ready, would help trigger the remembering. James realized he was part of that trigger, that his regression wasn't random, that finding this chamber wasn't coincidence. He'd hidden this knowledge in one life and found it in another. He'd died protecting it and lived again to reveal it. The cycle was complete, but the headaches didn't stop, they got worse. Because now that the chamber was open, now that the knowledge was coming out, James felt a pressure, a responsibility, to do something with it, to understand it, to share it. He worked with Dr. Williams, helped translate what he could, but it was slow, frustrating. Some of the symbols triggered memories, flashes of Amenhotep's life, fragments of understanding. But it wasn't consistent, wasn't reliable. He couldn't access it on demand. So he went back to Dr. Morrison, did more regressions, went deeper into the Amenhotep memories, tried to recover the training he'd received, the techniques for reading the symbols, the methods the priests taught, and slowly, over months of work, it started to come back. He remembered the key. The symbols weren't just words, they were frequencies, vibrations. You didn't read them with your eyes, you read them with your consciousness. You had to shift your state of awareness, quiet your thinking mind, open to direct knowing, and then the meanings would come, not as thoughts, as understanding, as truth downloaded directly into your awareness. James taught himself to do this. Practiced daily, sat in front of copies of the symbols for hours, breathing, opening, receiving, and it worked. Information came, not all at once, not in linear fashion, but it came. And what he learned changed him. The texts confirmed what Amenhotep had been taught. Consciousness is eternal. Death is an illusion. We've all lived countless times in countless forms, and we're all connected, all part of one infinite consciousness, experiencing itself through billions of individual perspectives. The purpose of life, the texts said, was to remember this, to wake up from the illusion of separation, to recognize yourself in others, to understand that helping others is helping yourself, that harming others is harming yourself. And the texts described methods, practices, ways to accelerate the awakening, meditation, breathwork, energy cultivation, mental discipline. The ancient Egyptians hadn't just believed these things, they'd developed technologies for consciousness, for expanding awareness, for accessing states where you could perceive beyond the physical, where you could remember your other lives, your connection to the whole. James started practicing these methods, started teaching them to others, and people responded. They had their own memories surface, their own past lives revealed, their own understanding deepen. And James realized this was his work now. Not accounting, not his old career. This, helping people remember, helping consciousness wake up. Dr. Morrison documented everything, the regressions, the discoveries, the correlation between what James remembered and what they found in the temple. He published papers, gave presentations, faced criticism from colleagues who thought he'd lost his objectivity, who thought James was a fraud, who thought the whole thing was an elaborate hoax. But the evidence kept mounting. James knew things he couldn't have known, predicted things they'd find in the chamber, described texts before they were translated by experts, drew symbols that matched, named priests whose names were later verified in other records. The skeptics had explanations, research, lucky guesses, contamination of the evidence, but the explanations got thinner as the evidence got thicker. 5 years after the first regression, James went back to Egypt, back to the temple. He stood in the chamber where Amenhotep died, where he died, and he felt peace. The headaches were gone, not suppressed, gone, because the memory had been recovered, the mission had been completed. What was buried had been found. What was forgotten was being remembered. He placed his hand on the wall, on the symbols that glowed, and he felt them respond, felt energy flow, felt connection to something vast and ancient and eternal, felt all his lives at once, Amenhotep and James and countless others stretching back and forward through time, all him, all one consciousness playing different roles, learning different lessons, growing, evolving, remembering. Dr. Williams stood beside him. She'd changed too. The discovery had opened her mind, made her question everything she thought she knew about history, about consciousness, about reality itself. She'd started her own regression therapy, started recovering her own past lives, and discovered she'd been in Egypt before too. Not as a scribe, as a priestess, in a different temple, different time, but connected, always connected. They looked at each other, and they both knew this wasn't the first time they'd worked together. Wouldn't be the last. Souls travel in groups, meet again and again, play different roles, but serve the same purpose. Help each other remember, help each other grow, help consciousness wake up to itself. The temple became a site of study, of pilgrimage. People came from around the world to see it, to feel it, and many of them reported the same thing. Standing in that chamber triggered memories, opened something, made them remember things they shouldn't know, lives they'd never lived in this body, knowledge that came from somewhere else, somewhere deep and ancient and true. James gave talks, wrote books, shared what he'd learned, but he always emphasized the same point. This isn't just about Egypt. This isn't just about the past. This is about now, about you, about remembering who you really are, about waking up to your eternal nature, about recognizing that you've lived before and will live again, about understanding that your current struggles and pains and fears make sense when you see the bigger picture, when you see the pattern across lifetimes. He helped people do their own regressions, access their own memories, find their own temples, their own forgotten lives, and he watched them change, watched the healing happen, watched people let go of fears that had haunted them for decades once they understood where those fears came from, watched relationships transform when people recognized each other from previous lives, watched purpose clarify when people remembered their soul's mission. The work continued. The chambers yielded more texts, more symbols, more knowledge, and teams of researchers worked to decode it, to translate it, to understand it. But James knew the real understanding wouldn't come from academic study. It would come from consciousness itself, from people doing the inner work, from meditation and regression and direct experience, from remembering. He still practiced the techniques Amenhotep learned, still sat with the symbols, still accessed the state where direct knowing was possible. And in those states, he received more, not from the texts, from the source the texts came from consciousness itself, from the field of infinite intelligence that underlies everything. And he understood, the temples weren't buildings. They were states of awareness. The real temple was inside. The real knowledge was within. The texts and symbols and chambers were just triggers, reminders, ways to activate what you already knew, what you'd always known, what you'd just forgotten. James never went back to accounting, never went back to his old life, because he'd remembered who he was, what he came to do, and he couldn't unknow it, couldn't unfeel it, couldn't pretend anymore that this life, this body, this personality was all he was. He knew better now. He remembered. The headaches never returned, because pain is just the soul trying to get your attention, trying to make you remember, trying to wake you up. And once you listen, once you remember, the pain stops, the pressure releases, the mission can continue. 10 years after finding the temple, James stood on the banks of the Nile at sunset, the same river he'd known as Amenhotep, the same water flowing, connecting past to present, then to now. And he thought about all the scribes and priests and seekers who'd stood here before him, who'd dedicated their lives to preserving knowledge, to keeping the flame alive, to helping consciousness remember itself. He was one of them, had always been one of them, would always be one of them, in this life and the next, in this form and others. The details changed, but the essence remained. The work continued. The remembering spread, one soul at a time, one lifetime at a time, one temple at a time. The stone walls still stand, the symbols still glow, the knowledge still waits. Follow to remember what you buried.